If you're preparing for the AWS Developer Associate exam and feeling overwhelmed by the 200 plus services AWS offers, you are in the right place. I will record a series of videos explaining each exam domain. By the end of this series, you'll know exactly what to study, what to skip, and how to pass on your first attempt. No 40-hour courses, no outdated content, just what you actually need to know. Let's get you certified. This series is designed for 4 types of people. First, developers preparing for the AWS Developer Associate exam who want a clear path through the noise. Second, cloud engineers who need hands-on AWS skills, not just theory. Third, anyone who has just failed the exam before and needs a better approach. And fourth, people who learn better with practical demos than watching someone read AWS documentation to you for 8 hours. If that's you, you are in the right place. And I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Alex, a professional cloud architect. I passed all AWS certifications and want to share my experience with you. What makes this series of videos different is simple. We focus on exam patterns, not just service definitions. You'll learn why AWS designed things this way, which helps you answer scenario questions even when you've never seen the exact question before. Now let's see what you are signing up for. The exam is called AWS Certified Developer Associate, DVA C02. The target candidate should have 1 or more years of hands-on experience developing or maintaining applications by AWS Services. And in the exam guide, they also describe recommended general IT knowledge, recommended AWS knowledge. So you are expected to be able to develop functional applications, have experience in development tools, in application lifecycle management. You must know at least one high-level programming language. Recommended AWS knowledge is you must be able to develop and secure applications by using AWS Service APIs, CLI and SDK. Use CI/CD pipelines to deploy applications on AWS. What is interesting, they also have out-of-scope requirements for the exam. For example, you're not expected to design architectures, design and create CI/CD pipelines, administer IAM users and groups, administer servers and operating system. And you're not expected to design AWS network infrastructure as well. The exam content, you will have 65 questions. Among those, 50 questions affect your exam score. And there will be additional 15 questions that do not affect your score, but AWS uses them to study your performance and to study how students generally perform answering those questions. The passing score is 720 out of 1000. That's roughly 72%. But here's the thing, AWS uses scaled scoring, so it's not exactly 47 questions right out of 65. Some questions are weighted differently and some are experimental, so they do not count. The exam costs $150 or the same amount converted to your local currency. Your certification is valid 3 years and then you'll need to recertify. The exam is divided into 4 domains and they are not weighted equally. For example, development with AWS Services is 32 of scored content and, for example, troubleshooting and optimization only 18%. Pay attention to these percentages because they should guide you where you spend your study time more. Domain 1, development with AWS Services. This is 32% of your exam, the biggest chunk. It's about writing code that uses AWS. Think Lambda functions, DynamoDB tables, API gateway, S3 operations. This is where the most people struggle because it requires you to actually understand how the services work together, not just what they do individually. And I recommend going through the exam guide because it describes in a lot of detail. For example, on the skills level, let's see, skill 111, describe architectural patterns, event-driven, microservices, monolithic, choreography, orchestration, fan-out. If you answer this question, you will already cover a few questions on the exam. And for example, another skill, handle streaming data using AWS services. It's not about knowing specific services, it's knowing exactly how you handle streaming data. So if you go through this skill requirements and try to look up answers in the documentation or Google stuff, you will be very close to being prepared for the exam. Okay, let's go back to our domains. Domain 2, security, that is 26%. Security is about IAM policies, roles, Cognito for authentication, encryption with KMS, and secrets manager. The exam doesn't just ask what is KMS, it asks something like your application needs to rotate database passwords weekly, which solution requires the least operational overhead. So the difference is quite significant. Content domain 3 is deployment, 24%. This is your CI/CD pipelines, code pipeline, code build, code deploy, code commit. Also Elastic Beanstalk and CloudFormation. Especially there's a lot of questions about Elastic Beanstalk for some reason. You need to understand blue-green deployments, rollback strategies. If your deployment fails in production, how do you recover? Automate deployment testing, deploy code using AWS continuous integration, continuous delivery services. You're not expected to be able to create the CI/CD pipelines. This exam just tests how you use those. For example, to update existing infrastructure as code templates using SAM templates, CloudFormation templates, deploy an application version by using deployment strategies and other tasks. Content domain 4, troubleshooting and optimization, 18 of scored content. That is about CloudWatch for logs and metrics, X-ray for tracing, finding performance bottlenecks. Notice how the exam is weighted heavily toward actually building and deploying things, not just defining what services do. The exam tests if you can do the work, not if you are mentioning the correct AWS services. So what makes this exam so challenging? First, it's scenario-based. The questions aren't what is Lambda, they're about how we integrate Lambda with other things where it makes sense. Now you need to know Lambda's 3 events, DynamoDB, and understand architectural trade-offs. And second, there are often multiple right answers. The trick is finding the most cost-effective solution or the one with the least operational overhead. AWS likes these qualifiers. You might know 3 ways to solve a problem, but only one fits the constraints described in the question. Third, the exam assumes you can write code. You should understand REST APIs, JSON structure, HTTP status code, error handling. They won't teach you programming. They assume you already know. And fourth, AWS changes fast. Services get new features constantly. This series is built on the current 2025-26 exam blueprint, but always check the official exam guide for the latest updates before you schedule your test. One of the most common questions, how long does it take to prepare for the AWS Certified Developer Associate exam? The answer depends on your background and available time. Let me give you 3 realistic paths. Aggressive path, 4 weeks. This assumes you're studying 2 or 3 hours daily. You already have AWS experience and you have a strong coding background. This is doable, but it's intense. You are essentially making this exam your part-time job for 1 month. Standard path, 6 to 8 weeks, 1 to 1.5 hours of daily study. You have some AWS familiarity. Maybe you've played around in the console and deployed something to EC2 before. This is the most common timeline I see with people who pass. Comfortable path, 10 to 12 weeks, 30 to 60 minutes daily. You are new to AWS or you're balancing this with a demanding full-time job and family commitments. There's no shame in taking it slower. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Here's what I want you to understand. Be honest with yourself about available time. Rushing through in 2 weeks and failing costs you $150 and demoralizes you. It's better to pace properly and pass on your first attempt than to fail twice and spend 300 plus months of frustration. Over the next 10 weeks, we are going to cover architecture patterns that underpin every single question. Stateful, stateless, event-driven, loosely coupled. These aren't just buzzwords, they are the framework the exam uses to test you. IAM and security that 26% of your exam depends on. I promise I'll make it as painless as possible. Lambda, DynamoDB, and API gateway in practical depth. Not just what is Lambda, but when do I use Lambda versus Fargate and why. CI/CD pipelines that you'll actually understand, not just memorize. We'll build a complete pipeline together, monitoring and troubleshooting with real scenarios. And practice questions with detailed explanations. Not just the right answer, but why the wrong answers are wrong. Everything you need to pass is in this playlist. You've got this. Alright, before you move on to video 2, here's what I need you to do. Hit the like button if the roadmap was helpful. It genuinely helps other students find the series. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the new videos. I'm releasing these weekly and you want to stay on track. And that's it. See you in the next video. Bye.